So this one's actually a pretty crazy story if you guys don't know anything about it, because this one lie literally shaped centuries of history and reality for Japan. Ever since ancient times, Japan has been ruled by one unbroken lineage of emperors. And ruled is kind of a relative word here because a lot of times the emperors didn't hold any power. However, there is one emperor whose lineage and descendants basically created the entirety of Japan that we know of today. I'll get to that. First, we need to understand how the imperial line worked. Each emperor would obviously have a son to continue his lineage, but oftentimes they would have more than one son. So these extra sons were then demoted to lower families, unable to continue as an emperor in the future. Despite these other branches or families not being able to continue as emperors, they were extremely influential in the rest of Japanese history. One of these families, called Minamoto or Genji, had a branch whose originators were the sons of Emperor Seiwa. So the line was called Seiwa Genji, and the descendants of this line ruled Japan for hundreds of years and were the only shogunates to ever rule over Japan. This bloodline, hailing from Emperor Seiwa or the Seiwa Genji, ruled Japan for hundreds of years over 3 shogunates. The first one being the Kamakura shogunate, which was the first one ever, the second being the Ashikaga, and the third during the Edo period being the Tokugawa. However, one of these was not actually related to Seiwa. Tokugawa Ieyasu was one of the 3 great unifiers of Japan who unified the country after the War in States period. He then became the first shogun of the Tokugawa shogunate and started the Edo period. The Edo period lasted for about 250 years and was one of the most influential periods in Japan's history. It was a time of peace and a giant cultural boom. So a lot of the traditions and culture that you see when you go to Japan, like tea ceremonies, geisha, and kimono, even though they have ancient roots, were solidified in Edo period Japan. So this highly influential period was obviously created and stabilized by the Tokugawa shogunate. However, Tokugawa Ieyasu was never related to Seiwa, and therefore never should have become the shogun. By this time in history, it's basically unspoken rule and tradition that only the people descended from the Seiwa line, or the Seiwa Genji, could become shogunate. Tokugawa Ieyasu, whose real family name was Matsudaira, petitioned the court to change his name to Tokugawa, thus essentially reviving or fabricating an ancient lineage that traced back to the Seiwa, therefore legitimizing his rule as the shogun. If you noticed, I said fabricated. That's because this lineage that Tokugawa claims led back all the way to Seiwa has little to no evidence for legitimacy. So it's widely accepted and known today that this claim of lineage was simply a political move to allow him to become shogun. So if his claim didn't work out, the Edo period wouldn't be the Edo period, and a lot of the culture we have today wouldn't be here or would be completely different. In fact, there might have been more warring states periods or continuation of civil wars. If you didn't know this, subscribe because I make videos about Japanese history and anime that are based off Japanese history too.